In the previous tutorial videos, we talked about how we can define the attributes and two versions of the constructors for the point class. And also we trace it as to how you can create new instances for the point class. As we try to see over here, you got the 4 lines of code, which is going to create 4 distinct objects at the runtime. Okay, so now I want you to make sure you're comfortable with, number 1, you're able to really see every time when we're calling a constructor, which version is being called, as we try to explain in detail in the previous video. Number 2, you want to make sure when you actually create the objects by executing one line, you're able to see that both in the Eclipse debugger, which we show, and also how you can draw it by hands, like this. When you actually write the written test later, or even computer test, you want to make sure you can keep track of the objects that's being created. That's really important so that you get the logic for your program correct. Okay? Especially, I want you to really get the skills of drawing simple diagrams like this. Okay, we talked about this already in the previous video. In this video, I want to just speak a little bit more about the constructors. Okay, there's a very important keyword I want to introduce to you by improving the constructors. Okay, I'm gonna refer to this particular illustration from the previous video in just a moment. Okay, so let's come back here. So what I would like to do is I'm gonna show you also one thing that we haven't seen before. Under your Java projects, there's a way to actually organize different versions of the classes or different categories of the classes. Okay, pretty much like in your file system on Windows or on Mac or on Linux, the way to organize your file is by creating folders or directories. In Java projects, the way to organize related files is by putting them into different packages. Okay, that's something you may have seen so far in the course, but I just want to introduce that to you formally. Okay, it's very easy to do. Under source, I'm just going to right click and say new package. Okay, the naming convention for packages in Java is like this. It should be all lower cases, and for the compound word, it's going to be separated by underscore. Okay, so I'm just going to say points underscore v1 version 1. Okay, and then I'm going to say finish. So now, as soon as you have done this, if you go back to your source folder, actually that's something okay, you don't have to worry anyway. So basically we got one package over here, and then I want to make sure the previously defined point and point tester classes, I want to put them into points v1. That's what I want to do. Okay, one thing I want to show you first. If you look at point and point tester at the moment, they're under the so-called default package, which means no package has been associated with the two classes. Now, as soon as I drag and drop these two classes into points v1 package, and we're going to see we have to identify the package for each class in this case. Okay, so now just remember at the moment there's no import for both classes, but now I simply select the two classes and drag them into points v1. Okay, you just move your mouse over and then drop into v1 points v1. Okay, so the two classes will be moved under the points v1 package over here. You got point, you got point tester. Okay, so in this case, the advantage is we don't have to just rename point to be point v1 and also point tester to be point tester v1. That could be a little bit inconvenient sometimes. I simply use the package to disambiguate. But now if you look at that, you can see at the top line here, we have something new that the Java, the Eclipse add for us. So now we're seeing that for point tester, this is under the package points v1. And also for the point class over here is under the package for points v1. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to create a second package for the second version, because I want to show you some improvement for the two versions of constructor for point class. Okay, that's why I'm creating two versions. But for version number 1, I'm going to leave it the same as the previous videos, but from now on we're going to develop from the second version of the point class in the points v2 package. Okay, so what I would do is, first of all, I'm going to right click on the source again, and then to create a new package, and then package over here, I would say points underscore v2. Okay, points underscore v2 version 2, and then I'll say finish. So now I'm going to select the point and point tester over here, right click, and then you can say copy. Okay, so just click on copy over here, and then right click on this initially empty package for points v2, and then you can say paste. Okay, so now you can see Eclipse really does something systematically for you, because now you can see, okay, so now, sorry, let me just cancel that. So now you got point and points tester, also you got point and point tester, but there's no confusion over here, because if you click on the points over here, it's under the package points underscore v2. And if you click on point tester over here, it's under the package points underscore v2. Okay, so there's no confusion over here. You just gotta make sure every time when you develop your code, you know which version of the package to go into. Okay, so now let me close everything. I'll say close all. Okay, so now from now on, I'm gonna leave points v1 alone. I'm gonna start developing from version 2. Okay, more thing to say. Yes, I'll mention that a little bit later. Okay, so now if you click on points over here, you can see it's under package points v2. And also if I click on point tester here, it's also under the same package for version 2. Okay, so now I want to keep the tester just the same. We're still creating the 4 different objects over here. Okay, but now the only thing I'm going to change is how I define the constructor. Okay, now I want to go to the point class for version 2. Okay, I'm gonna make it a little bit okay, this is what I would do. Okay, so now we still got the 2 attributes x and y. Okay, remember what I said previously. Okay, this is version 2. So now for the first version of the constructor, as we said before, we are expecting 2 double values over here. Okay, and now I want to talk about a little bit about the names of the input parameters over here. One is called new x, the other one is called new y. You can see the new x is used as the right-hand side for this assignment here, and new y is used for the right-hand side assignment over here, right? So now I want to talk about whether you should really every time come up with a new name or a unique name for the input parameters. You can definitely do it. Nothing wrong with version 1. You can always say new x, new y, or you can say x value and y value, as long as they don't actually clash with the attribute value over here. Okay. However, there is a way for you to actually give the input parameter name just the same as the corresponding attributes. So you would know very clearly that I'm really talking about to initialize this particular attribute value. However, if you do it, there might be some confusion over there. So this is a keyword you have to use to disambiguate. Okay, I'm going to show you exactly how. And the version 2 is actually the more common style of writing Java program you want to get used to. Okay, so now what I would do is, so now let's say we are very lazy. We don't want to come up with any new names for the variables. So now if I know that the first parameter is going to be used for reassigning or initializing x, I'm just going to call it x. Okay, similarly, for the new y over here, I know that eventually it's going to be used to initialize the attribute y, so I'm going to call that y as well. Okay, of course, I'm going to change new x to x and new y to y. Okay, so now we don't have any compile time error. However, you can see we do have a warning. You can see the yellow underline over here. If you move your mouse over, the assignment to variable x has no effects, meaning that somehow, you want to know whether, basically we have x here, we also got x over here, but which x are we talking about? As we learned from the previous tutorial video, the intention for this particular line over here is to initialize the attribute x over here by the input parameter value x over here. That's the intention. Okay, the same intention as before. But now, if you write it simply this way, it's actually not correct, because remember, if you move your mouse around the variable, it's going to highlight where the variable is declared, right? If I move x over, let's just say the right-hand side. If I simply select the x over here, you can see the x input parameter is actually highlighted, not the attribute x. Okay. On the other hand, if I go to the target of the assignments, you can see also what we are changing is actually the input parameter x rather than the attribute x. So that is wrong. Okay. So now how can we fix this? We really want to say the following. When we do this particular assignment, we want to write it in a way that is going to initialize the x attributes by the x input parameter value. But how do we say that? So now we have to use a new keyword. Okay. So now what I would do is I'm going to write it down and then I'll explain to you. You're going to say over here, this, which is a keyword, dot x. Okay. I will explain what this really means and also what dot actually does. Okay, that's something I will explain to you in just a moment. But given that you already understood the concept illustrated in the previous video, this would not be so difficult to understand. Okay, I'll get there in just a moment. And similarly, I'm gonna say this dot y over here. Okay, let me just write a very quick one line description for this. This is the this keyword over here refers to the new objects being created. Okay, and then of course we don't have new x anymore, so we can get rid of this line. Okay, and now when we go to version 2 over here, okay, so now you can see over here, so now somehow we got x versus this dot x. Okay, that's for version 1. For version 2, I want to also use the this keyword, this over here, and also this over here, and also this dot over here, and then this dot over here. Once I explain what this really means and visualize it, you'll realize actually having this in the context, in the code, can make it easier for you to understand what's going on over here. Okay, I'm going to trace the program for you. Okay, and also you know about this particular error from the previous video, so I'm going to delete it this time to keep it simple. Okay. So now later I'm going to talk about when you should use this and when you can omit it. Okay, for most of the time you can simply ignore the use of this because it's kind of implicit. It's as if you put this in the code. Okay, so now let me summarize what I have changed so far, and then we're going to trace the code. What I have done was basically I've got for the first version of the constructor, I'm using an input parameter x, which has the same name as the attribute x over here. So to really disambiguate, this is the mandatory context for me to use this. So I simply say the current object being created, go to its x value, and that should be assigned to the input parameter x. Okay, and go to the look up the object that's being created currently, this over here, go to its y attributes and assign that into the y value as supplied by the input parameter over here, right? So that's basically what's going to happen. And similar for this. Okay, so now let me do a snapshot, and then we'll actually trace the program again. And we're going to trace together with the point tester under v2, right? So now we're going to assume we are in version 2. Let's go back to the point class over here, and then I'm actually going to temporarily get rid of this comment over here so I can make an entire snapshot so you get a complete picture. Okay, so now I'm going to again do a snapshot. Okay, let me do it again. I'm gonna do a snapshot over here for just the part I need over here. Okay, just this part. Okay, let me go back to iPad over here, and then I will use this to actually give you one insight to the previous illustration, but I'll do that in just one moment. Let me go to a new page over here, and then I'm going to paste the new code for version 2. Okay, so I'm going to paste it. Oops. Okay, so that's the code we just got with the introduction of the this keyword. Okay, so that's the code we just had. And then I'm going to also go back to Eclipse over here. I'm also going to go to point tester for version number 2. And I'm also going to copy part of it. Okay, so I'm just going to get just this part, just about the object creation. Okay, only this. That's all I'm going to copy and paste. Okay, so let me go back to iPad. And then I'm going to, again, paste that particular fragment of code. And then we'll trace things like how we did it in the previous video. But now the tracing has only one single learning outcome. Well, I want you to understand completely how this actually really work. Okay, so we got two classes over here. Okay, we got point tester, and notice that we do have the keyword over here. Let me highlight it for every one of them. Okay, so let's say yellow will be okay. Okay, we got this over here. We got this, and this. So these are the uses of the this keyword. Okay, so now this is not a variable, this is a keyword, so you have to spell that verbatim. So now let's see exactly how we can trace the code. Okay, so now again I'm going to start with a similar process as we followed in the previous video. Again, we're going to do the diagram similar to this. Okay, let me give you a quick insight very quickly. Okay, as I said before, we talk about constructor over here, for example, constructor here. So constructor for this one here is simply just a block of code that can be reused over and over. Every time you try to call this particular constructor over here, you just have to give values for new x and new y, right? And every time when you try to give new x and new y, it's going to simply assign the values for the attribute for x and y. So now here's the thing. Remember previously, we're simply trying to, let's say P1 and P2, we're simply calling the same block of code the first time over here, and the first time over here, and the second time over here, the 2 times, right? The first time is going to refer to this particular object that's being created, and then assign the x value here, and assign the y value over here, right? So this is really the object we are talking about. This is the objects. On the other hand, for the second call to the same constructor version over here is a pink one. I'm trying to highlight over here, right? So that one there, we are trying to basically create this particular object over here, this particular one. And then try to assign the x to be -2 and y to be -7. You can see which x to actually assign to depends on which object we are talking about. Specifically, which object that's currently being created. So that's this object we are talking about, right? So now, this is why the keyword is called this. So now, let me just go back to, so that's kind of insight I want to mention very quickly, since I didn't really say that explicitly in the previous tutorial. But to understand how to use this, the keyword, you have to understand this insight. Let me go back to the new page I just created. Let's now do the same tracing very quickly, all right? So now, let me just start with the first line. The first line over here is going to be the first time we are trying to call this particular constructor, the first version, right? So this is the very first time we're calling this constructor. And then, since we are calling the point constructor, so we're going to create a new object over here. That's how we visualize it. Make sure you're comfortable with that. And make sure you can also draw it by yourself, okay? So now we have the point objects over here, and every point has x and y. So that's why we're going to put x and y over here, and then since we're having 3 and -4, that means x will be 3 and y will be -4 over here. So now every occurrence of x should be replaced by 3. Every occurrence of y should be replaced by -4. But what about this particular line over here? When we say this dot x, okay? So this x over here, okay, does not refer to the input parameter. Okay, number one, okay, it does not. Instead, it refers to this dot x refers to the attributes x of the new point objects currently being created. Okay, I think that is a very complete description for you. Okay, you want to know this dot x does not refer to the input parameter x. No, it doesn't refer to it. Does not. Negative. Instead, it does refer to the objects that were currently being created and refer to its x value, which is over here. It is what it is referring to. Okay, that's something I want you to really get 100% clear. So now, what we will replace is for every occurrence of the input parameter x is only going to replace x by 3. And also y by -4. So now when we say this dot x over here, so the object that's currently being created is this object here. What about dot? Okay. When you say this dot, okay, basically dot notation over here. Dot simply means go to the, in this case, go to the objects being created. Okay, as far as using this in the context of constructor is concerned, this simply means just go to that object over there. It's more like a lookup process. Look up the address of the object and go there. Okay, we're gonna see again later on. We're gonna use this keyword in all the other methods in version 2. So we'll try to elaborate this notion a little bit later. Okay, so simply go to the object being created. So you go there. So this dot x is going to go refer to this particular x. So now when you say this dot x is assigned to 3, it's going to assign that to 3. And this dot y is going to be assigned to -4. So you assign it to -4. And then eventually P1 is going to store the address of this particular objects, right? It directly points to that. Okay, hopefully you're comfortable with that. Let me do one more tracing for you. Okay, so let's have maybe red. Okay, what about this one here? Basically, for this one here, we are calling the same constructor over here. Okay, we're also calling version number 1. We're calling version number 1 for the second time, which means we're calling the same block of code over here, but now this is actually referred to a different object. More specifically, so let me just put it, how about here, okay? Because for this particular call to the constructor, we're basically using the point constructor, so which means we are creating a new object. So the object that's currently being created is this object over here. Okay, so that means this, the red one, is really referring to this particular object over here. Again, it's a point object, so we got x and y. So we got x and y over here, and then the input value is simply just going to be -2 and -7. So that means x is going to be replaced by -2. Every occurrence of x will be replaced by -2. And then y value will be -7 over here. So every occurrence of y is going to be replaced by -7. So what do we have? We basically have this dot x is assigned to -2. And also this dot y is assigned to -7. That's what we have, basically. Okay? So now this is really the object. You can see this is referring to this particular object that's being currently created, rather than this object here. This object is gone, right? We have done that object creation already, so it's not referring to that object. So that's why this is really important to understand the meaning for this. It's simply the object that's currently being created. Okay, so now this dot x is assigned to -2, assigned to -2. This dot y is assigned to -7, put -7 over here, and then we're going to assign the address of this particular object to and store that in P2. So P2 indirectly pointing to this object here. So now if you do some simple checks, if you say P1 equals P2, it's simply just going to be false because they are different objects. So the addresses will be different, right? Also, if you say P1 not the same as P2, it's going to give you true. Okay, so that's something from the previous video. Okay, so now it would be an exercise for you to see how you can trace the next two lines. Basically, it's going to be the same. Okay, let me just give you a very quick sketch. If you want to trace the next two lines, first of all, it's going to call the second version of the constructor this first time and also the second time. So for the first time, the keyword this is going to refer to a point object that's being created, right? And for the second time, you're going to call this particular second version is just going to create another point object. In that case, the this over here is really referring to this particular object. So every time when you're trying to create a separate object, the meaning of this simply changes to the current object that's being created. Okay, it's really important for you to follow this. Okay, and the main purpose for using let me switch to Eclipse over here. The main purpose for using this in the constructor is mainly that we don't have to come up with new names for the input parameters. If you in some way that's more suggesting about if I simply say the input parameter over here over here is simply called x, that means I'm really trying to initialize my attribute x using this input parameter x. Okay, let me remind you again. If you simply say x is assigned to x, this is simply wrong because both of them is referring to the input parameter. If you want to refer to the attributes for the current object that's being created, you must say this dot x. Okay, this is not appropriate neither is this appropriate. If you say this.x is assigned to this.x, that's also not correct. Okay, I'll say inappropriate. Assign input x to input x itself. Okay, this also is not appropriate. Inappropriate over here. Okay, assign attribute x to attribute x itself. Okay. Okay, so for these two, they shouldn't be there. So I'll simply select it and control /. Okay, comment them out as a note to you. Okay, so now basically for this video, we talk about only one single concept about using this in the context of the constructor to disambiguate between the input parameter and also the attribute value over here, the attribute name. And now, if you look at version 2 over here, okay, if you simply put this over here, that is okay. However, I want you to think about whether it is necessary or not. The reason that having this is necessary for version 1 is because we choose to have the input parameter name the same as the attribute name. That's why we had to say this.x versus x. On the other hand, for the second version of the constructor over here, so let's now consider whether it would be necessary for you to put the this over here to disambiguate. The answer is no, because if you look at over here, the parameter name axis and also distance, they do not clash with any of the attribute name x and y over here. So this is why you don't have to say this, even though this will be implicit. Okay, let me show you what I really mean by this. Okay, so now over here, let me write out some notes for you. Okay, we'd say here the names of parameters, axis, and distance do not clash with any of the attributes names, in this case x and y, so we do not have to use this dot x to disambiguate. On the other hand, for version number 1, we have to, because if we didn't use this dot x, then we wouldn't know whether it's this x that we want to refer to or this x attribute we want to refer to. Okay, for version number 2, there simply is no such need. Okay, so now let me say one more thing, which means over here, let me just show you two versions over here. Okay, so now one version would be, I can simply say over here, I say x and y, and over here, I say this dot x and this dot y. Both are correct. Okay, in such a case where this is not, where the use of this is not necessary, because there will not be any name clash, the use of this is simply implicit. Implicit in the sense that when I say just x over here, it is as if I said this dot x. Okay? When I say y over here, it is as if I say this dot y. On the other hand, over here, when I say x over here, it is not as if I said this dot x, because the x over here will match the input parameter name, which has the same name as the attribute name. Okay, so this is really the difference between the two scenarios. You want to be clear about both. Okay, so now implicit, let me spell it correctly. Okay, so that's about one more thing to show you. If you actually move your mouse, let's say if you select x over here, you can see if I move the x over here, you can see x is now in line number 35 is referring to line number 12 that is highlighted. So it's really referring to double x, the attribute value. And also, if you try to also highlight this particular x over here in line number 39, it's also referring to line number 12, which is the attribute value. On the other hand, if you try to highlight the x value on the right-hand side for line number 17, it's highlighting the parameter value x in line number 16, right? On the other hand, if you refer to this x over here in line number 17 on the left-hand side of the assignment, because we got a this to really disambiguate, so now the x here particularly is referring to the x in line number 12. Okay, so now hopefully that's clear to you. Again, you only have to use this mandatory if you want to disambiguate between the parameter name that clashes with the attribute name. Otherwise, you don't have to use this, like how we are doing over here. In which case, this will just be implicit. But you can feel free to use this. Sometimes sometime later when I want to trace the code for the methods, I will actually put in this because it's easier for you to see what the objects that's being currently considered. It's actually clearer for us to trace the code. Okay, either way. Okay, please review the use of this keyword, and then starting from next video, we'll actually continue. We'll actually leave the constructors alone. We assume that we always got these two versions available, and then we're going to move on to define some interesting methods for us.